This month, gun control myths, how politicians and the media and botched studies, in quotes, have twisted the facts on gun control. So we're going to try over the next hour to try to clear some of that up. And in order to do so, we'll, of course, be talking with the author, who is Dr. John Lott, who's been on the program with us many times before, founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He's an economist, has his Ph.D. from economics from UCLA, is an individual that has written a lot on the issue of Second Amendment, as well as a number of other things. This book is his 10th book. His previous 9 are some of the most famous books, like More Guns, Less Crime, The Bias Against Guns, Freedonomics, one we really enjoyed that conversation as well, Dumbing Down the Courts, how politics keeps the smartest judges off the bench, The War on Guns. But this one is entitled Gun Control Myths. And Dr. John Lott, always great to have you on the program with us.
Oh, it's great to talk to you again. Thanks for having me on.
Let's talk about the foreword for just a minute. We're going to focus most of the time on the book, but I thought it was intriguing because people who start reading the foreword were going to go, wait a minute, I would have thought that this person would not be endorsing your book. He would be actually endorsing gun control. So I think there's an interesting story there, isn't there?
Right. Well, it was very nice of Andrew Pollack to write the foreword for the book. Andrew lost his daughter Meadow at the Parkland High School shooting. And before that, Andrew didn't really care or pay much attention to the gun control debate. His views have shifted dramatically, though. As you say, many people think the solution to that type of attack is to ban guns. But what Andrew has come to the conclusion that, in fact, it was the fact that you had a gun-free zone that didn't allow people to be able to go and protect themselves, made it so that teachers or staff couldn't be armed, which created the problem that was there. You look at these mass public shootings, and 94% of the time they pick targets where victims aren't allowed to be armed. These attackers may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. Their goal is to try to kill as many people as possible, and if they go to a place where people can't protect themselves, it gives them a huge strategic advantage. Now, you can put an officer there, like they had at Parkland, but one of the problems that you have with uniformed officers is that they have an almost impossible job. If an officer is present when the attack occurs, and the attackers know that they're the one person that has a gun, then who do you think they're going to kill first?
That's right.
They know if they kill that person, then they essentially have free rein to go after others. Or they look around and see whether or not the officer is present when they go and do the attack. So anyway, Andrew's views have changed a lot over time, and I know mine have too, as I've done more research on this, because I think I was affected as much as anybody else by the way the media covers these things, and I think the media actually endangers people's lives by giving them incorrect information on a lot of these issues.
Let's say we can talk about the media because in your introduction, you talk about the difference between the way, say, CNN and the mainstream media covered Parkland, which is in Florida, and Santa Fe, which is in Texas. Parkland, a more liberal area of the country. And yet when you got to actually address the issue of Santa Fe, Texas, a little bit different. And so there is a perfect illustration that you use early on in the book about the difference and the interest or lack of interest in covering those two and doing a town hall. Tell us a little bit more, if you might.
Right. Well, at the time, I was able to kind of social media message back and forth with Jake Tapper at CNN, who was the moderator who ran the town hall for Parkland. And afterwards, I sent him a message just saying, look, Jake, it would have been nice if you guys could have had like one person asking questions on the other side of the debate. And Jake responded to me saying, well, John, you have to understand this is Broward County. It's a very liberal area. It's not surprising that we'd have everybody on one side of the debate. And then a couple months later, when there was the Santa Fe shooting in Texas, a much more conservative area where you had a lot of the parents and others complaining that the school hadn't moved to go and have teachers and staff being able to carry guns. About 40% of the school districts in Texas allow teachers and staff to carry guns. I texted or sent Jake another message just asking, well, are you going to have another town hall? And he basically stopped responding to me at that point on these things.
Good point. Just before I take a break, one other point, since we're talking about the media, is when you refuse to debate, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't care or that you don't have expertise. And you give a good example there that there have been times when, say, a Republican member of Congress says, I really don't understand the issue. I'm not an expert on that. And so that shows they don't even care. But then on the other hand, if you've been involved in a number of debates over the years where the Brady group or others refuse, well, that's not the same. And so it's just another way which Dr. John Lott, I want our listeners to have some discernment. If somebody chooses not to participate in a debate, it just means they choose not to participate in a debate. It doesn't mean they don't care about the issue or that they don't have good arguments. They just think maybe somebody else would be better at doing that. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Look, basically with myself, the gun control groups have made an agreement among themselves that they won't appear on radio or television with me or even do debates at universities. And I think they've basically come to the decision that because a lot of places, a lot of TV programs will only have you on if they can have somebody on the other side there. And they basically have come to the decision if they can go and all agree among themselves not to participate, they can keep me off the TV. I've had a number of times where I will have gotten a call from CNN or one of the other national programs and ask if I will participate. And I say, sure, I'm happy to do it. And I'll be driving into the studio, and I'll get a call back saying, well, the people from every town have said that they're not willing to debate you. Could you suggest somebody else that we could have on, or we've just decided that we're just going to go with the Bloomberg guy and have them on by themselves. I would never think of just saying that I'm not going to participate unless you have the type of person that I want to go and debate on the other side. But, with politicians and stuff, they want to put somebody in an awkward position, somebody who doesn't always know a huge amount about the issue. And I wish the media would be a little bit critical in asking tough questions of the gun control advocates. I can give you, when we come back, I'll give you an example.
I certainly will. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. John Lott, and we're talking today about his book, Gun Control Myths, coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
China has been in the news lately, and not just because of their mishandling of the coronavirus. A number of government officials have been warning of the danger China poses. And before we go any further, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party and not the good people of China who have little control over what these communist leaders do. FBI Director Christopher Wray gave a shocking presentation earlier this month in which he mentioned that nearly half of all the FBI's current counterintelligence cases are focused just on China. He described China's frequent counterattacks, predatory practices, and economic espionage that have resulted in one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that Chinese leaders should back down in their military actions in the South China Sea. He said the world will not allow Beijing to treat the South China Sea as its maritime empire. America stands with our Southeast Asian allies and partners in protecting their sovereign rights to offshore resources. Attorney General William Barr was not only critical of the Chinese government, but of Hollywood and big tech for their cooperation with China. He said, I suspect Walt Disney would be disheartened to see how the company he founded deals with foreign dictatorships of our day. Daniel Blumenthal and Nicholas Eberstadt in a recent column argue that the Communist Chinese Party is far more powerful today than it was in Mao's time. That's quite a statement and a reminder that we should ask political candidates if they believe China poses a danger to the U.S. Already, President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden have given vastly different answers to that question. This is an important foreign policy issue for our time. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. John Lott, again, the head of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and talking about his book, which is Gun Control Myths. 9 different chapters. We're going to talk about some of those myths, but also a chapter on the heroes that the news media never covers. Sometimes we cover some of that here on this program. How some botched studies have fooled the world, and just a whole series of other things about the myth of the lack of funding for public health research on firearms, and much, much more. So lots to cover. But you were talking about the fact that oftentimes individuals don't know the research. And Dr. Lott, one of the things I've appreciated about you is that when you write a book, there are an enormous number of endnotes so people can check it out. You, over the years, I know, have made available your research for anybody else to look at and evaluate, which on the other side doesn't seem to happen very often. So the open-handed way in which you've looked at this research, I think, is one of the reasons why we always like to give you a forum here on Point of View.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, the only way I think you can really end up convincing people about things is to let them see your data and let everything be transparent so people can check things out themselves. There are too many times, and we may get into this in our discussion, where people have refused to let others look at their data or to let them know exactly how they put things together. And I think eventually, I hope, it comes back to discredit them. But, it has a real impact on the debate.
Let's see if we can get into some of the myths, or maybe let's talk about a loophole or few. We broadcast in 42 different states. One of those is South Carolina, and a lot of people have started talking about, and you have a section in your book about the so-called Charleston loophole. And again, this has to do with the shooting done by Dylan Roof. And I guess the argument is, if given enough time, we might have caught him and kept him from getting a gun. But you've done the research to help us understand that the so-called Charleston loophole is really kind of fictitious, isn't it?
Yeah, it's completely made up. I mean, look, they could have spent 10 years checking his criminal background, and they still wouldn't have been able to stop him from buying a gun. If you're a convicted felon, you're banned from having a gun, but you're also banned if you've been arrested but not yet convicted, if the prison term that you would be facing would be more than 2 years. And the problem is that he was arrested for a misdemeanor drug possession, but the maximum penalty he would have faced would have been 6 months. And so, unless they want to go and change the law and say that, any drug possession, even a misdemeanor, would have resulted in him, being able to lose his ability to go and buy a gun, he would have been able to go and do that. And so this notion, Comey at the FBI and others have kind of pushed this too. Obviously, it was used a lot by the Obama administration and by Hillary Clinton when she was running. But, it's not, they're just misstating what the law is. I was chief economist for the United States Sentencing Commission, and these types of sentencing issues were ones that we dealt a lot with. And people can look up the law there and see it's pretty clear.
Let's see if we can get into some of the myths. And one of those is that if we ban guns, we'll reduce the homicide rate, we'll reduce the murder rate. And yet, as you've looked at this data, and you can look at different states, because you have some states that have very strong restrictions, California and New York, where we broadcast, and others like Arizona, maybe a variety of others with very few. In most cases, and help us if we've made a mistake here, when you ban guns, it seems like the homicide rate and the murder rate goes up, doesn't it?
Yeah. Look, we've had a number of places, a couple of places in the United States, like Washington, D.C. and Chicago, which have tried banning handguns. But you look around the world, any place that's either banned all guns or all handguns has seen increases in murder rates and homicide, often very large, 3-fold, 6-, 7-fold increases after the ban went into effect. You'd think out of randomness, you'd get one time where it would fall or even at least stay the same, but yet it increases every single time. And there's a simple reason for that, and that is when you go and you ban guns, it's the most law-abiding, good citizens who turn in their guns, not the criminals. And to the extent that you disarm law-abiding citizens relative to criminals, you actually make it easier for the criminals to go and commit crimes. The problem is how hard it is to stop criminals from getting guns. The major source of illegal guns in the United States are drug dealers. Drug dealers have weapons because they have valuable property that they need to protect. It's not like a drug dealer can go to the police and say, look, this other dealer stole our drugs. Can you help us get them back? They have to set up essentially their own little militaries in order to try to protect that extremely valuable property that they have. One example I can give you is you can look at Mexico. Mexico has had only one gun store in the country since 1972. The most powerful gun that you're able to buy legally in Mexico since 1972 is a .22 caliber rifle. You're not allowed to privately sell a gun. If you want to get rid of your gun, you have to sell it back to the military there that runs the one gun store. Guns are extremely expensive. Less than 1% of Mexican adults are legally allowed to own a gun, and yet Mexico has a murder rate that's more than 6 times higher than the murder rate that we have here in the United States. And, if I were to be able to click my fingers and cause all illegal drugs to disappear from the United States and all guns, how long do you think it would be before illegal drugs started coming back into the United States? If you're in El Paso, 20 minutes maybe?
Yes.
And how long would it be before they'd bring in the weapons that they need to protect that valuable property? They'd be bringing them in at the same time. And so, it'd be nice if it was easy to stop criminals from getting guns, but it's about as difficult to stop criminals from buying guns as it is to stop them from getting illegal drugs.
Let's see if we can for just a minute, because in your book you talk about the fact that gun control advocates such as Vox never mention that every single time that guns are banned, either all guns or handguns, the homicide murder rate goes up. And as you said, you just think sometimes randomly you might have one that goes the other direction. But then you say they begin their discussion on mass public shootings by using the data from an individual at State University of New York. And you looked at the data and you said, wait a minute, you're missing a lot of cases cases. So sometimes when individuals who are promoting gun control actually promote it, they will actually cite a database that is incomplete or missing a lot of important facts. So in some respects, that's another reason why you wrote this book, because sometimes those, quote, studies, in quotes, aren't actually complete studies, are they?
Right. Well, there was a study by a professor at the University of Alabama that's probably been the most cited academic study in the world this century. He claimed that 31% of the mass public shooters in the world were in the United States. And for about 4.5 years, he refused to go and give out his list of cases to people at the Washington Post even, or some other news outlets, or various academics who had asked him for the list of shootings that he claimed occurred in the United States and the rest of the world, and also how he exactly decided to put the list together.
Yes.
I didn't believe it from the beginning, to be honest, because I've collected many of these types of cases. And I finally forced him to reveal his list of cases after 4.5 years of getting all this publicity by publishing an academic article that kind of forced him to kind of reveal his list. And it was amazingly bad. I mean, he literally had missed thousands of mass public shootings in other countries. He had miscounted cases in the United States to make it look like it was relatively higher than it was compared to these other countries. And rather than the United States making up 31% of the mass public shooters in the world, we make up about 1%, which is way less than our almost 5% of the world population. The United States is well below the average. And there are many countries in Europe. France, for example, has a fatality rate from mass public shootings that's about 111% higher than what we have here in the United States.
Let me take a break here.
Russia has a rate that's about 50% higher. Many other countries in Europe are higher.
We'll continue our conversation with Dr. John Lott as we talk about his book, Gun Control Myths, right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation again today with Dr. John Lott, who is, again, the founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center, talking about his book, Gun Control Myths. And Dr. Lott, for just a minute, when you were talking about miscounting or overcounting or making some mistakes, it reminds me of something else in your book where the claims from Vox are that there have been more than 1,600 mass shootings since Sandy Hook, or then another one, on average, there's been one mass shooting for each day in America. And one of the things I'm trying to pass on to our listeners is to look at data like that when they watch a television program, when they read an article and say, wait a minute, one mass shooting every day. That doesn't even sort of pass the straight face test, because mass shootings usually involve 4 or more individuals who were killed. Even if you say, well, 4 or more individuals were shot at, there is no evidence, and our personal experience would suggest that we haven't had one mass shooting every day in America. So in some respects, even without knowing all the facts that you have in your book, I think we can use some level of discernment to say some of these claims are just pretty much outrageous, aren't they?
I agree. The problem is a lot of people seem to accept these things uncritically.
I know.
Look, it has to deal with how you define these things. So traditionally, as you say, the FBI has defined a mass public shooting as 4 or more people killed in a public place, not involving some other crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf. What it's devolved into for these larger numbers would be things like, 3 people that could be wounded or something like that. But it's more than that, and that is it includes other crimes being committed. It includes things like gangs fighting over drug turf. And when you break down the data, the vast majority of the shootings in those larger number of cases involve drug gang fights. Look, are drug gang fights an important problem? Yeah, they sure are. But the causes and solutions for them are dramatically different than these mass public shootings, where the point of the attack is simply to go and kill people in a public place like that. And what they try to do is to make people think that you're having these school shootings or these shootings at movie theaters or someplace else where it's just somebody going in there and just trying to kill people, and they're mixing the two together there. And I think it's really, creates a real misimpression for lots of people. I'll give you just one example. You look at these mass public shootings, 94% of the time they occur in places where guns are banned.
Right.
The reason why people are doing these mass public shootings is to go and get media attention. They want to kill as many people as possible, and they know if they go to a place where their victims can't defend themselves, they're going to be more successful in committing that crime. And, these guys may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. They know if their victims can't defend themselves, they'll be more successful in accomplishing that. So, it just, anyway, it's you got to be careful and ask people, make sure you know how they're putting the numbers together.
Well, and just to underscore your point, I know when we've talked about this with you before, the mass shooter there in Aurora, Colorado, actually drove past other movie theaters where people were allowed to conceal carry to go to a particular theater in town center there in Aurora, because he knew that there would not be individuals that would have a concealed carry weapon on them. And so you can see, even in their deranged mind, how they may be crazy, but they're not stupid, and they're actually looking for a gun-free zone where they can do the greatest amount of carnage.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of forced to have to read the diaries or other statements that these murderers leave behind. And, you can't help but read those over time and just come away being impressed by the fact that these individuals plan and put a lot of thought into their attacks. I mean, 6 months is a short amount of time for them to go and plan them. Someplace like the Sandy Hook killer, he spent 2.5 years planning his attack. Just in that case, for example, he had put together what police described as essentially a doctoral dissertation, where he had looked at mass public shootings over the previous 40 years. And just to give you an idea, he had gone and looked at these shootings and found out the amount of media coverage that the different attacks had gotten, and had literally graphed out the relationship between the number of people killed in the attacks and the amount of media attention that they got, showing that, the more he could kill, the more media attention he would get. According to one police report, he had hoped to kill more people than the Norway killer had killed. The Norway killer had shot to death 67 people because he wanted to get more worldwide news attention than the Norway killer had gotten. Now, there's one thing I can't prove, but just having read what I have about him, my guess is the reason why he attacked the elementary school was in part for shock value. That he thought that if he went and shot little kids, that would help him get even more news attention than he would get by going after some other target. Given the amount of attention that he seemed to put on what he could do to get news attention, that's my guess why he picked that particular target.
Well, we're talking about shootings. One of the other myths that you take on is that there appears to be evidence, according to, say, the BBC, that these attacks are becoming deadlier over time. But what did you find in terms of your research?
Well, I mean, the number of attacks has remained fairly constant. In the last couple of years, you've seen an increase in the United States in terms of the number of people killed per attack on average. But if you look over a long period of time, you really don't see much of a change that has been occurring. Yeah. One of the things that people will make is they'll make the claim that the shootings are deadlier in the United States, but that's simply not true. If you look at the number of people killed on average per attack in, let's say, Northern Europe or Western Europe, or particularly outside of Europe, there are many places in the world that have much higher deaths per attack. The deadliest mass public shooting in Europe occurred in November 2015. That was the concert shooting in Paris, where 130 people were murdered. Right. People. One of the things that you quickly realize when you're looking at this is that, and it's understandable, the media covers the shootings in our own country much more than it covers shootings in other countries. And that gives people a real misimpression about how the United States compares to other countries. You take something like the mosque shooting in New Zealand last year. Everybody knows about that, but do they know that within 24 hours, less than 24 hours of that, there was a big school shooting in Brazil, or that there was a mass shooting in the Netherlands that had occurred? No. It's just those types of things happen all the time. The worst school shooting occurred in 2005 in Russia. And that had 385 people that were killed in that attack. And there was over 550 were wounded. But, my guess is relatively few people know about those things.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with John Lott. And on the flip side of it, we won't spend too much time, but Chapter 4 talks about something that the press rarely covers, and that's a whole chapter on the heroes that the news media doesn't cover, because oftentimes you hear the stories, but you don't necessarily get the actual facts about individuals that actually were able to prevent a shooting or to limit it in one way or another. So there's a whole whole chapter on that. Of course, there's a whole chapter as well as the politicization of the FBI and how a botched study even fooled the world about, as we talked about just a minute ago, the U.S. share of mass public shootings, which we sort of alluded to. So when we come back, we'll get into maybe a couple more. One of the arguments is that there's just a lack of research in this whole area of public health research in guns. And for those of you that are younger and did not live through the assault weapons ban, maybe we'll get into some lessons we learned there as well. All of it is part of this new book that came out earlier this month. It is entitled Gun Control Myths. It is the 10th book by John Lott, and he, again, is the founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center. Just a lot of very accurate statistics, facts, and figures, and in some cases stories that you will enjoy, or at least appreciate. Maybe enjoy is the worst word when we talk about such horrific issues, but if you can finally understand this whole issue of guns and gun control, this is another book that will be helpful to you. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Dr. John Lott for a few more minutes, and might just mention that even though we're talking about various myths in the book, occasionally he finds a claim that is true. One of those, support for gun ownership has sharply increased since the early 2000s. You find that to be correct. Even before, of course, the various protests and riots in the streets, which have increased people's interest even more so in the Second Amendment and firearms. So lots of that that is in the book. But But your last two chapters address something that we've only briefly talked about with you in the past, and that is there's been this push for public health research on firearms. And, of course, you have been doing this for decades, but now there's a push from Michael Bloomberg, from the government, and a number of other things. And so one of your chapters talks about the myth of the lack of funding for public health research, and then another chapter on why is so much money from the government and Michael Bloomberg going in that direction. So where are we in terms of the funding for research of Second Amendment and gun control and those kinds of issues?
There's been a huge amount of money. I mean, Michael Bloomberg alone is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on it. You have the federal government from 2015 to 2018 spent something like $43.5 million on it. You have other places. There's the Arnold Foundation, which has given a grant of maybe up to $50 million to the RAND Corporation to go and fund research on these topics. So, I mean, I don't even know how people spend the amount of money that they do on this. I mean, you have grants. You know, somebody can get $800,000 or $700,000, and they produce a paper. I mean, I've often made the joke, you know, you could pay me a tenth of that and I'll produce, 5 papers or something like that. But my book, More Guns, Less Crime, involves the largest study that's ever been done on crime. I didn't get $1 of outside funding. I mean, I basically paid for it out of my pocket to go and get the research done. And, it's just, but what's interesting, we have a survey that I did with Arthur Berg at Harvard and Gary Mauser, a professor at Simon Fraser University in Canada, where we surveyed all the academics who have published peer-reviewed empirical research on guns. And it's the largest survey that's been done. And what you find is that academics are fairly skeptical overall about gun control. But there are real differences in the profession. So like criminologists and economists are very skeptical of gun control, being able to stop criminals from getting guns, and that mainly it disarms law-abiding citizens. But public health people, the same people that are kind of involved in all these estimates about the number of people who would die from the coronavirus and what have you, they're relatively more in favor of gun control. So, for example, criminologists and economists think if you want to stop mass public shootings, the number one thing is to get rid of gun-free zones. That's about the least favorite thing for public health people. They're much more in favor of banning guns and other types of rules like that, whereas criminologists and economists are very skeptical that those types of rules will do anything other than disarm law-abiding citizens.
Well, last time I went to a doctor's office, the nurse asked me if I have guns at home. So, those kinds of public health questions surface all the time. But go ahead.
When I was at Yale many years ago, we took our kids into the doctor, and they were asking us questions about whether we own guns at home or not. And I don't know, I started asking, well, do you know how many children die from accidental gunshots and things like that? My wife was sitting next to me, started digging her heel into my foot while talking. She was not thrilled with me talking to the doctor and stuff about that stuff. So yeah, I've run into it firsthand, but.
You mentioned your previous book, which I have a copy of. Matter of fact, I have, I think, virtually all of your books, More Guns, Less Crime. But one of the myths there is more guns, more deaths. And that is a myth, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, we touched on this earlier. You would think that if simply getting rid of guns would make people safer, then every time they ban guns, you should see a drop in murder rates. But in fact, the exact opposite's true. There's also a similar myth with regard to suicides. The claim is that just the presence of guns causes you to have more suicides. But the problem is, you would think if that's true, then these places that have banned guns should see drops in suicides. In fact, the suicide rates just stay essentially exactly the same after gun bans as they were beforehand.
And just try something else. Yeah.
And so one of the myths I go through in gun control myths is just that it turns out that there are lots of different ways for people to commit suicide. One of the differences that are claimed is that, well, you're just much more likely to be successful in using a gun to commit suicide than other methods, and that's simply false. There are lots of ways that people kill themselves where they're, quote-unquote, just as successful, jumping off a tall building or walking in front of a train or a bus or a truck, taking cyanide, hanging yourself. All those have fairly similar, quote-unquote, success rates to shooting yourself in the head or the chest. And they also tend to be less painful, too, some of those. So, it's really, I think a lot of these myths actually endanger people's lives because, let's say you live in a high crime area. You want to be able to protect yourself. Police are extremely important in being able to protect you, but the police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred, and making people unnecessarily scared of owning a gun may make it so that they can't avail themselves and their families of having the most effective way to go and protect themselves and their families.
Certainly. Again, the book is entitled Gun Control Myths, and we have information about it on the website. I'm sure you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, it came out earlier this month, and we have a link there. Also have a link to crimeresearch.org, and that will connect you to the Crime Prevention Research Center. You're going to find a lot of good articles there, information about this particular book and some of the previous interviews, op-eds, and the rest. And so, if nothing else, Dr. John Lott, always great to have you on the program, and thank you for writing this book, Gun Control Myths.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's great to talk to you as always, Kerby.
We are going to take a break, but let me just mention that we do have a link to the book. We have a link to the website, and if you find yourself saying, well, you haven't convinced me yet, okay, that's fine. We certainly encourage you to get some of this information and evaluate it. And, of course, some of the previous books, the one that we've mentioned more than once, More Guns, Less Crime, is kind of the classic, but he also has written books on the bias against guns and the war on guns, but also on a variety of other things. Freedomnomics, what a great book. I've always appreciated that. And we talked last time with him about the dumbing down of the courts, how politics keeps some of the smartest judges off of the bench. So he has been writing on a lot of statistical issues, but especially on this issue of Second Amendment. I would certainly commend to you the work by Dr. John Lott and by the Crime Prevention Research Center. So you can find all of that at the website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, you'll also find information about his website. And if you can't find the book in the local bookstore, you can get it there both in paperback and in Kindle. So all of that available on our website, pointofview.net. Going to take a break, and when we come back, we have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me for the Monday edition of Point of View. This first hour, we're going to spend some time talking about President Donald Trump. Are you going to vote for him or vote against him? Do you agree with him or disagree with him? We're going to be using a new book that has just come out, Evangelicals at the Crossroads. Will we pass the Trump test? And we'll do our best to try to talk about some of the pros and cons and help you think that through as a Christian. But let me just mention as well, a little bit later we might get into a few of the articles I've posted. One having to do with the decision by Grace Community Church and, again, Pastor John MacArthur to actually hold services in the midst of the mandated lockdown in the state of California. Also one by Carl Jackson, 6 Reasons Black Christians Must Denounce Black Lives Matter. So we may get into that a little bit later. But we want to focus as much of our time and attention this hour by a very good book written by Dr. Michael Brown. He's been on the program with us before, founder and president of Ask Dr. Brown Ministries. Of course, he is the host of the syndicated talk radio program, The Line of Fire, which you'll be on in just about an hour. Holds a PhD from New York University, has been a visiting or adjunct professor at Southern Evangelical Seminary, Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, Fuller Theological Seminary, Denver Theological Seminary, King's Seminary, Regent University School of Divinity, and the author of about 35 different books. But we're going to focus some of our time and attention today on Evangelicals at the Crossroads, Will We Pass the Trump Test? And Dr. Brown, always great to have you on the program with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. What a day to be on the radio, huh?
Yeah. Well, and you're going to be busy even after we finish here. Of course, I will be as well. But I love how you say in your book, President Trump has surrounded himself with evangelical leaders. He has a strong evangelical vice president, perhaps the most evangelical cabinet in history, which I think is a fair statement, welcomes prayer and receives it humbly. At the same time, no president in memory has a less evangelical past and behaves publicly in a less evangelical manner than this president. So this, if you will, is one of the chapters in your book, the enigma of Donald Trump and the quandary of evangelicals. And that's kind of a theme for the book, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, because we've never had a president like Donald Trump. Not just the kind of guy he is, being unique and different and not a politician and an outsider and all of that. But on the one hand, he's done more for evangelical causes than any president in memory. More for the pro-life cause, openly, boldly, even speaking at the pro-life rally in January, first time a president's done that, fighting for religious liberty, keeping his door open to evangelicals as he promised, standing for family, doing things for poor and hurting people, facing up to the tyranny of China and dictators around the world, pushing back against radical LGBTQ extremism, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, all the things that he promised he would do that he's done. And we've had other presidents that evangelicals helped elect, but once they're in, they kind of put a wall up and we don't have the same access and things change. Trump's been the opposite. So you could say he's done more for evangelical causes than any president in memory, but he's also done more to hurt the evangelical cause than any president in memory, because he behaves a certain way. He can be juvenile with his tweets. He throws people under the bus. He calls people dogs. And to the extent we are looked at as apologists for Donald Trump, it hurts our witness. So which way do we go? And if we don't vote for him, then it was Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. Now it could be, if we don't vote for him, it's social anarchy, it's socialism. So it's a really precarious situation, one that we have to walk through wisely because the stakes are very high.
Well, and again, I appreciate the fact that even early on you quote from some individuals we've had on the program. Wayne Grudem, for example, that list that you created is certainly one of his. We've had Peter Wehner on here as well. By the way, a lot of pushback on that one, as you can imagine, because let's give him his due, a Republican, a Christian, but also a never-Trumper who talks about Trump's disordered personality and his unhealthy patterns of thinking and his addiction to lying. I think he called him a psychopathic liar or something like that when he was on the program here, and a number of others. So you really try to help us understand what you have the almost the always Trumpers or the usual Trumpers, and then the never Trumpers, who are all kind of speaking into this. And your attempt is to try to help us kind of think through what we can or cannot say, what we should and should not say. Is that a fair kind of assessment of what you were trying to do in the book?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, as fellow evangelicals, we need to understand each other, and we need to know where we're coming from and why, and we need to find a way ultimately to unite around Jesus, even if we differ about Donald Trump, rather than savaging each other and tearing each other up in the process. But in point of fact, the opinions on both sides are quite extreme. I voted for Trump in 2016. I opposed him in the primaries. I was a Ted Cruz guy. I didn't trust him. Obviously, I didn't like his past. I didn't think we could take his word. But I kept saying the whole time, I hope I'm wrong, and if it's him versus Hillary, I'll reassess. So I did vote for him. And the fears in terms of what he would do badly, those have been realized, but the hopes of what he would do rightly have been exceeded in many ways. And what I try to do in the book is lay out, okay, here's the case against Trump, primarily from evangelicals or professing Christians. Here's the case against Trump. Here's the case for Trump. And here's how we can support him as president without compromising our witness. But you mentioned having Peter Wehner on. Of course, I quote him in the book as a never-Trumper. I had Shane Claiborne on, a red-letter activist Christian Shane Claiborne, and I got pushback for that as well. But I quote Shane in the book. He said, I love Jesus, and it is precisely my love for Jesus that creates my outrage at Trump. When I look at the things Jesus said and compare them to the things Trump says, it's impossible to reconcile the two. I don't know how any Christian can defend Donald Trump. He said Trump evangelicalism is a cult. Let us rebuke it in the name of Jesus. And then right after that, I quote Pastor Robert Jeffress, who in 2016 said, if you don't vote for Trump, you're a fool, basically. So how do we work these things out? And the first thing is we have to understand each perspective, and we have to agree that on the day we stand before Jesus, God is not going to say to us, what did you do with Donald Trump? That will not be the first question. The first question is, what did we do with Jesus? And that's where we have to start with ourselves and say, okay, even if we passionately differ, let's not savage each other. The world is tearing itself apart. We can't do that as the church right now.
Well said. And again, I like your simple formulation that you talk about in the book. Much of what Trump does is praiseworthy. Much of what Trump says is cringeworthy. And many of the people that we have, especially on our Friday roundtable, say, look, I recognize he can be a bully and he can go after individuals and he tries to savage individuals. And sometimes he denies reality, which we've seen on the other side for years, and sometimes buys into conspiracy theory and all the rest. But if you're looking at what an individual was able to do and the kinds of policy pronouncements that were made and actually achieved, that's something that's worth mentioning. And so let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to spend some time talking first, of course, with Dr. Michael Brown. And if you would like to join us, and I know you would, 1-800-351-1212. But I think you're going to enjoy looking through this book and benefit from it because it's really asking the question, will we pass the Trump test? 17 different chapters. We've looked at the kind of the enigma of Donald Trump. We'll talk about the love test, and we'll get into that idea of the cult of Trump versus Trump derangement syndrome. Then what a vote might or might not do in terms of your witness as a Christian. What about the so-called pocketbook principles and issues like that, and what happens in this particular case if someone else is elected? We'll cover all of that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
China has been in the news lately, and not just because of their mishandling of the coronavirus. A number of government officials have been warning of the danger China poses. And before we go any further, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party and not the good people of China who have little control over what these communist leaders do. FBI Director Christopher Wray gave a shocking presentation earlier this month in which he mentioned that nearly half of all the FBI's current counterintelligence cases are focused just on China. He described China's frequent counterattacks, predatory practices, and economic espionage that have resulted in one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that Chinese leaders should back down in their military actions in the South China Sea. He said the world will not allow Beijing to treat the South China Sea as its maritime empire. America stands with our Southeast Asian allies and partners in protecting their sovereign rights to offshore resources. Attorney General William Barr was not only critical of the Chinese government, but of Hollywood and big tech for their cooperation with China. He said, "I suspect Walt Disney would be disheartened to see how the company he founded deals with foreign dictatorships of our day." Daniel Blumenthal and Nicholas Eberstadt in a recent column argue that the Communist Chinese Party is far more powerful today than it was in Mao's time. That's quite a statement and a reminder that we should ask political candidates if they believe China poses a danger to the U.S. Already, President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden have given vastly different answers to that question. This is an important foreign policy issue for our time. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Michael Brown as we talk about will we pass the Trump test? And this is just a great opportunity for you to find out a little bit more. Also have a link to askdrbrown.org. I think you will really appreciate all the material that is on his website. And again, we're talking about evangelicals at the crossroads. And Michael, for just a minute, let's talk about this whole idea of loyalty, because since when has loyalty to Donald Trump been the new test of evangelical orthodoxy? And since when has disloyalty to Trump be the test of orthodoxy, which is kind of the question you ask in your second chapter?
Yeah, it's really a remarkable thing that I've never seen. But basically, especially on social media, as people are interacting, that this is now the test. This is now what's going to prove whether you're really faithful to Jesus or not, how you stand with Donald Trump. And I think this is how it kind of developed. Many of us voted for Trump with some reluctance. We didn't think he was the best candidate, but we saw that it was him versus Hillary Clinton. We saw what she stood for. We felt, okay, let's vote and hope it comes out well. And then he keeps his word. That was amazing. And then he begins to make statements that we like, and then he begins to fight for us. And then we see the way that he gets savage, and somehow this loyalty rises where we feel we have to defend Donald Trump at any cost, and that you're now attacking our man. And it's an odd thing, but because he fought for Christians and continues to push back against those that have become our enemies as well, he becomes somewhat of this champion figure that we feel we have to back. And then when we do that, we can look very foolish in the eyes of the world, because for years we're evangelicals. We're the ones shouting character counts, morality matters, and we're the values voters. And people are thinking, that how can you support this man? On the flip side, I've seen this irrational hatred of Donald Trump. It's almost as if all of the radical left's talking points become the talking points for these never-Trump Christians. And I found something really shocking, kind of an immature reaction or a fleshly reaction on each side. And I feel like this is one way that God is using Trump, because God is multitasking, obviously, that Trump has raised up a lot of the carnality and superficiality in the body today. And that's why I have a whole chapter asking, have we passed the love test?
Yes.
And it was kind of a devastating chapter to write, because I quote verse after verse after verse after verse after verse as to how we are to conduct ourselves. It doesn't mean we can't be strong. It doesn't mean we can't have conviction. It doesn't mean that we can't be clear and forceful. But it means that we have to treat each other with humility and grace and honor and respect. And in that part of the Trump test, we've really failed thus far. And it's the wrong time to fail, because the world is in chaos around us. Society is gripped with fear. People don't know what's coming tomorrow. We have the answer. If we could kind of hit a divine reset button for the church now and say, okay, we have our views about Trump, but that will not be our primary discussion. Our primary discussion will be the gospel and helping a dying world. I think we could do a lot better.
Yes. Well, again, if they would know us by our love, they aren't seeing some of that right now. So I certainly appreciate chapter 3. But let's jump ahead, because you sort of already alluded to chapter 4. And you start out by quoting David French. Now, he's been in studio with us and on many issues, religious liberty, Second Amendment, all sorts of things. Evangelical attorney, Harvard graduate, served in the military. Really have appreciated him. On the other hand, he even took for a while the idea of maybe running against Donald Trump. So if you wanted somebody who's a card-carrying never-Trumper, he fits into that category, won't you think? But he raises a good question. What about two people that used to be so upset about what Bill Clinton did in office, now seemingly turning a blind eye to some of the things at least Donald Trump has done in the past? How do you respond to some of those questions that people are asking?
Yeah, and what's really intense is David French, in the article that I cite, quotes from the Southern Baptist Convention, where they put out these resolutions years ago about righteousness, about standing for truth and morality, and be it resolved that we will stand here and stand there. And French says, that was when the Clintons were in charge. Now it's time to make America great again. New standards apply. So are we a bunch of hypocrites? And in the book, I quote statements from evangelical leaders during the days of Bill Clinton. Now, granted, his moral failures, were while he was president, which is different in terms of sexual failures than Donald Trump. But it's very intense to read this, because it can seem like we're really being hypocritical. So I have two responses to that. On the one hand, we have been hypocritical because we have used double standards, those that are liberal, those that are pro-abortion, those that have ideologies different than ours. We hold them to a certain standard, and look, you're immoral and bad character. And then because Trump is fighting for good causes, we say, well, it matters, but it's not as important. We're hypocrites in that regard, but we're not hypocrites in this regard. Trump has shown tremendous character in keeping his word. I cannot imagine the pressure he's under every day in the White House and the spiritual attack that comes against people in D.C., and yet he doesn't cave in. He's not wavered on key things he said he would stand for, key things he said he would do. Is it not a matter of character? And Dennis Prager points this out, and I quote him as well, that a man keeps his word, especially under pressure. And if you think back, say, just to moving the embassy to Jerusalem, that was law from the days of Bill Clinton on. He didn't do it. George W. Bush didn't do it. Barack Obama didn't do it. Trump did it, and the whole world did not fall apart. The whole Muslim world did not go crazy. He did it, and he kept his word. So the way I would phrase it is this: character does count, and morality does matter. And in key areas where it's very important to us, Donald Trump has displayed strong character. On the flip side, because character does count, his character weaknesses have hurt him. In that sense, he's his own worst enemy.
Yes.
He gives a great speech at Mount Rushmore, and it's great for civil rights, too, from Martin Luther King to Jackie Robinson. It was great. It was inspiring. And then the next day, or within hours, he goes after Bubba Wallace, the NASCAR driver, and tweets like, "No, don't do that."
Take this
and he
away
just
from
did
him.
an interview
Yes.
where he said, he said, "I regret a lot of my tweets." So his character flaws do hurt him. So it's simple for me. I say, look, he is my president, not my savior. I don't like when he does those things. I wish he wouldn't, but here's why I'm voting for him. So we don't become his apologists. We don't become his defenders. We don't make ourselves look bad because we say, yeah, I don't like that either, but let me tell you the good that he's doing, and then we have a rational answer for the world.
I would think so. Just before I take a break, talk about this idea of a cult of Trump, because that came up in your interview. It's chapter 5 in your book. And, I have certainly, and I know you have as well, studied cult leaders. Donald Trump is probably the least likely to be a cult leader, but yet that's the phrase we hear sometimes from some of our fellow evangelicals. What about that?
Yeah, well, sometimes we can rally around Trump in a way that does seem a little cult-like when our allegiance to him is so extreme. And I have friends think, what happened to you? You used to be so Bible-centered. Now you're just a Trumpite. And I quote from Steve Hassan, a cult expert, in his book on the cult of Trump, and he talks about all the characteristics, etc. But the fact is, it's not true. Because if Trump moved away, I mean, Trump made the famous statement he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and everyone would still follow him. The fact is, if he moved away from his pro-life position, evangelicals would abandon him. If he stepped back from some of the key things he said he would do for religious liberty, etc., we'd step back. If he actually came out as a racist and supported white supremacy and neo-Nazis, we'd step back in an instant. I mean, he'd be rebuked privately, publicly. You just think when he pulled our troops or said he was going to pull our troops out of Syria, that brought public rebukes from Pat Robertson and even Franklin Graham. So it's not the cult of Trump. You do have the Trump derangement syndrome, where it seems that you watch news, you watch CNN, you think they're not even trying to be objective. They're not even trying to hide their bias. There's like a child, you stole my candy, I'm going to cry. Think, what happened to these professional people? And what I think, again, with Trump, is that he knows how to push certain buttons that bring out what is really in people's hearts. He knows how to push the right buttons. So some people, it ends up with almost this cult-like loyalty. With others, the Trump derangement syndrome.
Yes.
The bottom line is, if he moved away from any of his key pro-evangelical positions, we would not be voting for him. It's that simple.
I think so. Let's take a break, and we are privileged to have with us for a little bit longer Dr. Michael Brown. And when we come back, okay, let's get into this. Did God uniquely raise up Donald Trump? And has a vote for Donald Trump hurt our evangelical witness? And maybe a couple of other questions. Indeed, many people voted for Donald Trump because they saw the alternative Hillary Clinton as being objectionable. What about this time, given the fact that we assume the former Vice President Joe Biden will be the nominee, and we'll have a vice presidential nominee that we're still guessing about? We'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Less than 100 days. I think it's 98 days till the election. Who would you vote for, Donald Trump, or most likely the former Vice President, Joe Biden? If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Michael Brown with us as we talk about his book, Evangelicals at the Crossroads, Will We Pass the Trump Test? And Michael, I thought we might as well get to one of the most significant chapters in your book, and a question that people have asked many times before. Did God uniquely raise up Donald Trump? Since you wrote a chapter on it, I'd love to hear your answer.
I say yes for two reasons, but then I need to qualify what that means.
Sure.
The first yes is just a totally natural, pragmatic yes. It was completely unlikely that Trump was going to beat all these Republican candidates. I mean, from Ted Cruz to Marco Rubio to Jeb Bush to I mean, on and on, fine candidates, Mike Huckabee and Ben Carson and all these others, wide range. But the day of the elections, there were polls, prestigious polls, that gave Trump a 1% chance of winning. And, the highest was maybe 18%. So the fact he got in it all indicates something unusual going on, that the polls missed, that others missed. But there were different Christians in different parts of the world that felt that God showed them, some before the primaries, some early in the primaries, that Donald Trump would be the president of the United States. I remember some colleagues putting these words out and getting incredible flack. What are you talking about? How could you endorse him? And say, we're not endorsing him. We just believe God's going to use an unlikely man. And they pointed to King Cyrus in the Bible.
Yes.
So Cyrus is mentioned in Isaiah 44 and 45 prophetically. He was the king of Persia. He overthrew the Babylonian Empire, so he became basically the world ruler of the empire at that time. And what the kings would do, the Assyrian kings, the Babylonian kings, they would crush the exiles. They would crush those that they had conquered. Cyrus had a different policy. Cyrus said, I'm going to send you back to your homeland. And in fact, I'm going to finance it for you to rebuild your temple, and you pray to your God for me. So that's what happens with Israel and the Jewish people. 2 Chronicles 36 tells the story. But the whole thing about Cyrus is God says, I'm raising you up even though you don't know me. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that Cyrus was a true worshiper of Yahweh, but God was going to use him to do good to God's people, even to rebuild Jerusalem. And what most folks don't know is that we actually have the words of Cyrus preserved. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder, that was written about 539 BC and was discovered in the late 1800s. My PhD is in Semitic languages, and this is what's written called Akkadian, the ancient language of the Babylonians and Assyrians. And Cyrus is praising Marduk, the god of Babylon, for raising him up. It's almost identical to Isaiah 45. Instead of recognizing it's Yahweh, the Lord, who did it, he's praising Marduk. He's full of himself. He's the king of all kings. And this is the man that God used to bless the Jewish people and restore Jerusalem. So the whole prophetic word was about the unlikelihood of a Donald Trump being used. Not that he was a fine Christian, not that he was an on-fire Bible believer. To this day, I have no idea if he has any real connection to God or if he even reads the Bible. But he's being used for many good purposes. That doesn't mean, though, that everything he does is right. In other words, he's God's man. He's anointed. Don't touch the anointed. No, that's foolishness to have that attitude towards him. It would be foolish if we had that attitude towards our local pastor. You could never disagree with your pastor, let alone President of the United States. But I believe he has been uniquely raised up, and I believe him being raised up is doing lots of different things at the same time, revealing the extreme bias of the media, revealing how radically left the Democrat Party has become, revealing the tensions and divisions in our country, revealing even carnality in the body and our willingness to put our trust in a person instead of put our trust in the Lord. But if we can rightly put our trust in God and then recognize, okay, what's the president supposed to do? Is he supposed to bring moral reformation to America? No. Is he supposed to bring spiritual, cultural revolution? No. Is he supposed to bring awakening where people turn to God? No. Is he supposed to enact good policies and keep us safe? Yeah. Has he done that? Yeah, he's trying. So that's how I boil it down.
Very good. Let's take some phone calls along the way. We'll head up to Maine. Bobby, you're on with Dr. Michael Brown.
Yeah, hi. Oh, wow. Dr. Michael Brown, I listen to you every night, and I listen to Kerby, too. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so I'm not asking this as a question per se for you to answer. When does Donald Trump get forgiveness from Christians, number one? That's my first point. Number two, Christians got their own problem, and let's not be high-minded, all these other Christians out there. It just always, they're carnal-minded, and they don't have a biblical view, and it just drives me crazy. I've listened to sermons and ministers and for 25 years, and there's so many good ones out there and everything, but let's get on board, and Donald Trump has been harped on and belittled, and it's unbelievable. And there's no case to be made. You're going to vote for the Democratic Party, who does nothing but do baby murdering, and it shouldn't even cross our thoughts who we're going to vote for. It's
sure.
Donald Trump.
Well, let me come to Michael, because, again, that gets us into just a minute. First of all, forgiveness, but second of all, the alternative. I mean, in some respects, I've had individuals in this studio even admit that right up almost to Election Day, they still couldn't bring themselves to vote for Donald Trump. And then they thought, what if I don't vote for him and Hillary Clinton and all the policies she would implement actually unfold? And then finally, reluctantly, they actually decided to vote for him. The same kind of question is up front now, because as you pointed out a minute ago, I think it's fair to say that the Democratic Party in 2020 is even more radical than it was in 2016, and certainly more radical than when Barack Obama was elected in 2008. So there is a lot on the table in terms of the stakes, and you talk about that certainly in chapter 13 of your book, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, what would have happened if Hillary Clinton was elected? Where would our religious liberties be? What would the courts look like? Look, there was a case in New York. New York decided they're going to ban counseling for anyone with unwanted same-sex attraction of any age. So an outrageous policy. An Orthodox Jewish counselor takes the state to court, backed by the Alliance Defending Freedom. They instantly say, okay, we changed our mind. We're going to back off of this. Why? Because they knew the court this was going to be appealed to had new Trump appointees, and they knew they would lose. This affects our everyday life. So, look, we all agree it would be nice if Trump could use restraint in some of his words and if he could be more careful with the truth. But when it comes to stopping the slaughtering of the unborn, I'd rather see this guy standing up for the unborn than someone shouting your abortion and saying, God bless Planned Parenthood. You know, when it comes down to who's going to fight against the tyranny of China and the persecution of Christians and other religious minorities there, will I pick Donald Trump or will I pick Joe Biden? When it comes to the question of do the Democrats stand for alerts towards socialism and even social anarchy, when we look at the cities with the protests and riots with Democrat governors and basically with the support of local mayors, is that the direction we want to go or not? So it's kind of a stark choice. And I bet a persecuted Christian in China, if you said, hey, this guy in America is fighting for you, can be a little nasty at times, they'd say, at least he's fighting for us. And a baby that's saved from abortion, I don't think that baby's going to say, well, I would have rather been aborted than had a nasty person. No. Thank God that Trump is standing for the key things he needs to stand for. And we have to bottom line it, because right now it's pretty much a vote for Trump or social anarchy.
I think so. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll just chat briefly with Dr. Michael Brown. Then he'll have to go do his radio program as well. But let me point to a couple of things as we go to a break. First of all, we have a link to AskDrBrown.org, and you don't even have to remember that because we have that link on the website, so you can find that. We also have a link to his Twitter feed and his Facebook page, so if you'd like to communicate with him, since we probably won't have time for all the phone telephone calls that maybe some of you would like to make or comments. Since we talked about China, let me just mention also my Viewpoints commentary today happens to be on the subject of China, and just reminding you of a variety of different things that have unfolded just in the last week about China that our administration has been addressing. And it's been interesting to see that the Democratic platform, which we now have a chance to look for, is really downplaying the danger of China. So if you think China is a threat, and I think that we can see that whether we look at the South China Sea or whether we look at the fact that the FBI Director Christopher Wray has said that almost half of all of their investigations right now, their counterintelligence cases, are focused just on China. Or you can look at some of the statements made by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about the South China Sea, or by the Attorney General William Barr, who was not only critical of the government, but also of Hollywood and big tech. Not to mention closing down one of the consulates for China because of stealing intellectual property. There is a difference, and we'll come back and talk briefly about that with Michael Brown right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Michael Brown with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Evangelicals at the Crossroads. Will we pass the Trump test? And if you find yourself saying, I'd really like to read the book, well, first of all, we have a link to his website. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Also have a link there where you can get it to be either in paperback or in Kindle, and I think you're going to find some great information. But Michael Brown, of course, you and I and many of our listeners are very supportive of the nation of Israel. And it is amazing amazing to me that even people in Israel that I've met, some Jews, some Gentiles, some Christians, some not, have said that we really think President Donald Trump is the best friend Israel has ever had. And given some of the other friends that certainly have been in the Oval Office, that's quite a statement. But in your chapter on the New World Order and Israel, we recognize that we're not just talking about Israel, we're also talking about other nations, European countries, and all sorts of tensions between us and Russia and China and the rest. And to think that through, again, is an important issue, because even today, my commentary on China illustrates again that you have a remarkably different set of statements being made about China from President Donald Trump and from former Vice President Joe Biden. So if foreign policy is another issue for you to consider in this election, I think you need to pay attention to what's in your chapter 14 of your book.
Yeah, look, we are dealing with global issues, and that's what some people point out. They say, look, no one's saying Trump is a perfect guy anywhere near it, but you need someone with incredible backbone and courage to take the stands that he's taken, especially some that are so politically incorrect. Most everyone else would have just crumbled or caved in or compromised, but there is a push for globalism. People may call it the New World Order and be skeptical, but George H.W. Bush gave his famous 1,000 Points of Light interview and talked about a New World Order. Angela Merkel basically said Trump has destroyed the New World Order. So there is a push for a globalism that can be unhealthy and often to America's detriment. And then China is a growing world power. I got off the phone with someone who was interacting with a Chinese church leader that was deported. They killed his friends and deported him to America, thinking that was the best thing they could do to hurt his work. And he says right now that watching from the viewpoint of communist China, America is one step from socialism, and Donald Trump is the only thing holding it back. And he also knows the only one that's going to stand up to China, stand up for the protesters in Hong Kong, stand up for persecuted religious minorities, is Trump, just as he stood up to his Islamic terrorism and named it for what it is. So we've got to look at bigger issues. Like we've talked about the slaughter of the unborn. We've talked about religious liberties. We could talk about radical gay activism and the effect that has on our kids in schools and things like that. And then the global issues. And then we put everything in proper perspective. The church is called to do what the church is called to do. Hence my last chapter with how to pass the Trump test, which is, can we vote for him and support him as president without losing our testimony in the process? And I say yes, if we put the cross before the flag, if we proclaim that Jesus is our Savior, he gets my heart, my soul, my life, my all. Trump's my president. He gets my vote. We put things in proper categories. We regain our prophetic voice to the nation. These are big issues. It's a big election. Let's focus on what the church is called to do and put our proper emphasis there. And when it comes to vote, what are we going to do? It's a simple choice as far as I can see it.
Yes, again, 10 essential keys for passing the Trump test. And again, that's just one of the 17 chapters there. And just before I let you go, because I know you're going to be doing your own radio program, we have a link to askdrbrown.org. And for, first of all, our friends that want to witness to their friends, neighbors, coworkers that are Jewish, you certainly have some great resources there. And of course, you have all sorts of material that comes from your 35 different books, as well as all the op-eds and things that you have written in the stream and a variety of other places. But talk about what's available on your website just before we let you go.
Yeah, we have a threefold emphasis: revival in the church, gospel-based moral and cultural revolution in society, and redemption in Israel. The 3 R's: revival, revolution, redemption. So we have literally thousands of free articles, thousands of free videos, links to our radio broadcasts, Jewish outreach material, debates we've had ranging from atheists to gay activists to Orthodox rabbis and others. So all those resources are there for free. And then at AskDrBrown.org, folks can connect with us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. And if they sign up for our emails, we've got a great little mini book called 7 Secrets of the Real Messiah. We send that out when folks sign up.
Yes, I would highly recommend that. It's a great resource. And again, I've produced material on the Messianic prophecy and some of that, but the 7 Secrets of the Real Messiah, which is a free ebook. And so I would encourage people to go there. Dr. Michael Brown, always great to have you on the program, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
Yeah, and thanks for all the great work you're doing. Keep it up, Kerby.
We're going to take a break here, and we're going to let him head off to his radio program, Dr. Michael Brown. And again, we've been talking about, will we pass the Trump test? And I certainly want to encourage you to get some of that information there. Evangelicals at the Crossroad, will we pass the Trump test? You can probably get that book at his website, but we also have a link there so you can get it in paperback or Kindle. Just before we take a break, and I might just mention as a program note, Alister McGrath, Dr. Alister McGrath will be with us next hour. We'll talk about Born to Wonder. But let me, for you out in California in particular, mention that Pastor John MacArthur, who is the senior pastor of Grace Community Church in Sun Valley, California, has actually argued that the state of California, in particular the governor, has overstepped its legitimate God-given authority and thus held their services yesterday, and in a fairly lengthy blog post made the comment, we cannot and will not acquiesce to a government-imposed moratorium on our weekly congregational worship or other regular corporate gatherings. Compliance would be disobedient to our Lord's clear commands. In their statement, I'll just read one part of it, they said politicians may manipulate statistics and the media can cover up or camouflage inconvenient truths. You think? They go on to say, so a discerning church cannot passively or automatically comply if the government orders a shutdown of congregational meetings, even if the reason given is a concern for public health and safety. So we're going to be watching what happens there. Not the first time that John MacArthur has been in the news, nor the last, I suspect, but I just wanted you to have that particular article, which I think was a good summary of some of the statements being made and what is taking place there. So that is one of the resources that we have on the website there, in addition to some of the material that I did in an earlier interview with John Lott, and of course this interview with Michael Brown, and the one we will be doing with Dr. Alister McGrath. But in an attempt to keep giving you good information on the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, Black Lives Matter, that's true. And of course, as a matter of fact, sometimes I want to say all Black Lives Matter because sometimes there is a singular focus in the movement. But the movement that we're talking about, the website itself, is one that has raised some really significant concerns. So I wanted to post this particular piece by Carl Jackson, 6 Reasons Black Christians Must Denounce Black Lives Matter. And he takes on a couple of those: socialism, abortion, class warfare, social justice, identity politics, and anti-Semitism. So if you would like to read that, it is a piece that I think really helped give a short summary as an individual who is African-American, wanting to say again the concerns that many people have with the movement, the organization behind Black Lives Matter. And so we wanted to provide that to you, and it's on the website pointofview.net. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we're going to talk with Dr. Alister McGrath, a brilliant British theologian. This one is entitled Born to Wonder, exploring our deepest question, who we are and why are we here and why does it matter? By the way, it's a really good book you could give to a non-Christian who's searching, and we'll talk about that with him right after these important messages.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time talking about this book that is just ready to come out next week, Born to Wonder, exploring our deepest questions. Why are we here? Why does it matter? It is written by Dr. Alister McGrath. And really, if you think about it, life is a gift. We find ourselves on this planet. It's a strange world of space and time. And as I have said so many times, if I wanted to give a book to an individual that's maybe been reading some of the so-called new atheists, you know, whether it's Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett or whatever, I think some of the books by Alister McGrath are such great antidotes to some of the ideas being expressed by these atheists. This book's a little different in that this might be the kind of book I'd want to hand to somebody who's kind of searching, kind of seeking, and really helping to address the issue of the search for meaning, which is something, of course, that many people have written about. And as you might imagine, Dr. Alister McGrath has done an outstanding job of doing so. He is, of course, an individual that has served as the professor of science and religion at Oxford University. He's been the professor of historical theology there as well, and currently the senior research fellow at Harris Manchester at Oxford. He has written on different aspects of the Christian faith. Last time we even talked about C.S. Lewis, and he's been engaged in a number of debates, a former atheist who oftentimes debates some of these individuals on these very important questions of life, and joins us now by phone from the United Kingdom. Alister McGrath, always great to have you on the program with us.
Well, it's always great to be on the program. I'm really pleased to be here.
This is a different kind of book. Would you not agree? No matter what, I'll say it's coming out next week, so I've got sort of an advanced reader's copy, but next week people should be able to find it in their local bookstore. We've got a link so you could pre-order it, but you break it down into just the questions people have about ourselves, then about life, and then about our future, and you really kind of take us on a journey, kind of a journey of philosophy and theology, isn't it?
It is, exactly. In some of my books, I really critique the new atheists and say, look, you've got it wrong. This one here is more saying, look, all of us ask these deep questions. Where do they come from? Where do they take us? And it's really, if you like, an expansion of the Genesis creation stories, all about being made in God's image. And one of the key points is we just can't get away from the fact that we realize there's more to life than materialism. We realize we're asking big questions about what life is all about. And when we start thinking about those questions, they begin to point us towards God, even if we don't want to go there. And it's a great opportunity for Christians to begin to have some wonderful conversations with their non-Christian friends.
And again, part of that is the quest for meaning. And you ask the question, how does science fit in? And, of course, then how does religion fit in? Because science can maybe tell you that the universe exists. It maybe even tells you how the universe comes together. It may even help you understand maybe some of its function. But it certainly can't answer the very important questions about meaning, significance, and origins, can it?
No, it can't. And if it does that, it's not science anymore. Mm-hmm. I think the key point here is that science is really good about telling us how things work, and it's great to know that. But what do they mean? What do we mean? And these are the big questions we need answers to. And what I'm saying is that science is great, but it does have its limits. If you like, there's a big picture of life, and science fills in part of that big picture, but only part. And we need more than science. And that's why Christianity is so wonderful, because it gives us the rest of the picture. It helps us to understand who we are, why we matter, what life is all about. It gives us that bigger sense of what things are all about. And, we really need that to lead meaningful lives.
I would think so. Well, one of your chapters talks about who are we, wondering about human nature, and the answer that comes from our atheist friends. Some of this comes from Charles Darwin. Some of it comes from Sigmund Freud. Some of it comes from Professor Pinker and a variety of others that basically just say we're just atoms, we're molecules. And yet there's a sense in which, even as my atheist friends sometimes try to make that argument, it seems a little bit hollow, because there seems to be more to life than life. There seems to be a sense, as C.S. Lewis talked about, that we were made for more than just the material world. We have a dog at home, and I can feed this dog, I can pat this dog, I can meet the physical needs of the dog. Dog seems content. I can meet the physical needs, Dr. McGrath, of a human being, and they wander this planet looking for meaning and significance. So it seems like we were intended for more than just this planet, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And, these atheists say, hey, you're just atoms and molecules. Well, listen, I've got a glass of water in front of me because I've got a sore throat. The water's made of atoms and molecules. Well, if you can't tell the difference between a glass of water and a human being, you are in trouble. And what I'm trying to say is, it is true that you and I are made of atoms and molecules, but that doesn't tell us who we are. We are so much more than that. And we need to really resist this very crude reductionism. We are so much more than that. And, of course, for the Christian, one of the key things is that who are we? We are people who God made and who can relate to God. And when we do that, everything looks so different.
Well, let's poke a finger at least a little bit at Richard Dawkins, because you talk about in there about the gene's eye view of human nature. And this is a famous quote by him, that basically we're just DNA's way of making more DNA. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. We wonder why the suicide rate is so high, if indeed you think that all you are is DNA's way of making more DNA. I think most people get the sense that that doesn't really answer this question about meaning very much, does it?
No, it doesn't answer the question about meaning at all. And that's one of the reasons why so many people will say, well, look, Richard Dawkins is right to ask these questions, but the answers he gives are so awful. They just don't meet our deepest needs. And look, okay, there's DNA that's there. It's great. It does some useful things, but there's so much more than that. And what Dawkins is doing is giving us this really impoverished view of reality. And, I often wonder if I could go back to being an atheist again. I think the answer is simply I couldn't, because I've seen what the alternatives are, and I know they're so much better. And he offers us this really impoverished, diminished, inadequate account of who we are. And people sometimes think believing in God makes us smaller. Well, you know something? Very often believing in God expands our vision of this world and who we are and why we matter. That's why I think really we need to challenge Dawkins and say, we can do better than this, can't we?
I would think so. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to get into this a little bit more detail. We're kind of working our way through the first part, which is wondering about ourselves, wondering about human nature. We'll come back and talk a little bit about human identity, mapping the landscape. Then we'll get into the section, which is pretty significant and lengthy, wondering about life, the human quest for meaning, and where does that come from, and the search for meaning, and how that all fits together. And then before the program is over, we'll see if we can then wonder about our future as well, because various humanistic ideas, both religious humanistic ideas and secular humanistic ideas, take us in one direction. And if nothing else, I think this would be just a great book to put in the hands of somebody that maybe is kind of searching a little bit, maybe just kind of wondering about some of these ideas, or maybe somebody that's read a little bit too much of the so-called new atheists that haven't really thought about how to apply some of these principles of logic and history and begin to open their minds up to the fact that maybe the Christian message really is true indeed. So we'll come back, and as I mentioned, the book's not quite out yet, but it'll be out next week. Born to Wonder, exploring our deepest questions. Why are we here, and why does it matter? We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
China has been in the news lately, and not just because of their mishandling of the coronavirus. A number of government officials have been warning of the danger China poses. And before we go any further, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party and not the good people of China who have little control over what these communist leaders do. FBI Director Christopher Wray gave a shocking presentation earlier this month in which he mentioned that nearly half of all the FBI's current counterintelligence cases are focused just on China. He described China's frequent counterattacks, predatory practices, and economic espionage that have resulted in one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that Chinese leaders should back down in their military actions in the South China Sea. He said the world will not allow Beijing to treat the South China Sea as its maritime empire. America stands with our Southeast Asian allies and partners in protecting their sovereign rights to offshore resources. Attorney General William Barr was not only critical of the Chinese government, but of Hollywood and big tech for their cooperation with China. He said, "I suspect Walt Disney would be disheartened to see how the company he founded deals with foreign dictatorships of our day." Daniel Blumenthal and Nicholas Eberstadt in a recent column argue that the Communist Chinese Party is far more powerful today than it was in Mao's time. That's quite a statement and a reminder that we should ask political candidates if they believe China poses a danger to the U.S. Already, President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden have given vastly different answers to that question. This is an important foreign policy issue for our time. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Alister McGrath. The book is coming out shortly, Born to Wonder, exploring our deepest questions. Why are we here and why does it matter? 300-page book, and I know enough about writing books and getting them published that you were probably writing most of this, Dr. McGrath, before the pandemic. But I can't help but wonder that now that it's coming out next week, in some respects, some of these questions actually maybe are even more poignant and surfacing now in the midst of this pandemic. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a very perceptive comment because the pandemic is, I think, helping us to see that we are much less capable of controlling our future than we thought. Actually, we don't have the power over nature that we thought we did. If you like, it's highlighting the fact that we're limited. We cannot do everything we want. And also, I mean, one of the things we're noticing here in the UK is actually it is bringing out a bit of human selfishness. It's a lens that shows us up as we really are. We're weak and we're foolish, and actually sometimes we do some really selfish things. So I think you're right. This really is a crisis that's highlighting what's wrong with human nature.
And again, as you talk about in Chapter 3, we want to avoid some of those kind of one-liner accounts of human nature. I just gave one example, but in that chapter, you give some other examples of individuals that have tried in one way or another to come up with a answer that we see, I think, best articulated by Augustine and by C.S. Lewis and a number of other individuals. But we live in a world today where sometimes those almost, if you will, Twitter kind of answers about human nature are very inadequate, aren't they?
They are. I love that phrase, a Twitter kind of answer, because people want simple answers to complex questions, and they just can't cope with the fact it's not as simple as they want. Richard Dawkins says it's really simple, and then when you look more closely, it's not. I mean, he says, you only believe what you can prove. But when you read his books, they're stuffed full of things you can't prove to be true, which he hopes you won't notice. So I think there's some really good points to make here.
Well, again, the second section really kind of gets into wondering about life, the human quest for meaning. And I love your chapter, Pilgrims Seeking a Big Picture, the Balcony and the Road. You kind of need something a little bit higher than just your own being on the ground. So you need the balcony, or you need a 20,000-foot kind of perspective. And so in some respects, what you're talking about there is if we're going to rise from the road by ourselves, we really need kind of God's eye for perspective, don't we?
We do indeed. I mean, I use this image of a balcony in a road. One is a big high-up view. You can look down and see everything. When you're on the road below, you can't really see things properly, and you have to make decisions of faith. And my point is, one of the great things about Christianity is that we are on the road, but we get the balcony view. We're able to actually see there is a big picture. We know where we're going. We can't absolutely prove things, but we know they're right, and we keep going. I think that's a very important point. It also means that as we journey on the road, we can talk to other people who are journeying with us. They can encourage us, they can help us, and they can tell us what they find helpful about their faith, which will help us as we keep going as well.
And one of the things we've talked about with you in the past is C.S. Lewis, a life, eccentric genius, reluctant prophet. But you have a section there about C.S. Lewis on seeing things properly, because he says, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. And so part of this gets back to seeing the world properly, in a sense, seeing the world through God's eyes, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm often struck by reading the Gospels, and Jesus touches people and heals them, and they see things for the first time. And that's one of the things the Gospel does to us. It helps us to see things as they really are, who we are, the way things are, and enables us to live meaningfully in the world. And that to me is really important. I love C.S. Lewis. He helped me grow a lot in my faith, and it's a big theme in his writings.
And again, I might just recommend your book on C.S. Lewis, because a lot of people have compared you to C.S. Lewis, but again, you've done a great job of evaluating him and putting him in perspective. So just before we get too much further, let's get into one that, again, kind of pokes the chest of some of our reductionist, atheistic, materialistic friends, because you have a section here called Searching for Meaning, Why We Need More Than Just Facts. We live in such a world, Dr. McGrath, that just simply says, give me the facts, give me the facts, give me the statistics, give me the science, trust the science, believe the science. But if we're starting to find out that doesn't always work so well, does it?
No, it doesn't. We need more than facts. And one of the points I'm making here is that, look, science is all about observations, and observations are great, but what we're looking for is a bigger picture that those facts point to. In other words, if they're threads, when you weave them together, what's the bigger picture? And one of the points I'm stressing is facts are great, but on their own, they're not good enough. And for me, one of the great things about the Christian faith is that, in effect, it's able to take all the things we know and say, hey, we can make more sense of this than anyone else can. Here is why Christianity is so good at making sense of things. And that, to me, is really important, because people like Richard Dawkins say, well, the Christians just run away from reality. Well, I'm sorry, we don't. We face up to facts, and we say, we've got a better explanation of why things are the way they are than you have. And that's a really important point to make.
And again, we've talked about Richard Dawkins. Let's put another name on there. This would be the atheist philosopher Alex Rosenberg. Now, he makes the case that science is our exclusive guide to reality, which I think is pretty audacious, but nevertheless, that's his argument. And so you then just take us through that, because if indeed we accept that science is all we need to understand reality, then you have a series of questions. Is there a God? No. What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What is the meaning of life? There is none. What is the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There's no moral difference between those. I've yet to run into too many people that accept that final conclusion, but sometimes they start with those initial premises, don't they?
They do, and I think Alex Rosenberg, without actually meaning to do so, has kind of shown why this worldview is so inadequate. I mean, he says, look, science is our only reliable tool to reality. There's nothing more than scientific knowledge. And then by the end of a paragraph, you suddenly realize he's contradicting himself. You need far more than science. In fact, at one point, he says that his approach is really very circular. It presupposes its conclusions. I think what Rosenberg does so well, although he doesn't mean to do this, is to show why we need more than science. He, in effect, is saying, look, science is saying, we can't tell you what's right and wrong. So do we say, hey, that means we give up on right and wrong? No. It means we say, right, if you can't tell us, we look somewhere else. Because right and wrong and meaning and value are so important. And what Rosenberg is really showing us is that science is great in its own area, but we need to go elsewhere to find answers to those really big questions.
And again, you hear people saying, in this life, we want nothing but facts. You give us a little bit of one of the characters in a Charles Dickens novel, but facts just are not enough. And in some respects, when we talk about how we reach out to our atheist friends, our skeptical friends, sometimes telling stories of meaning you talk about are very significant. And that's where we see the value of a C.S. Lewis or a J.R.R. Tolkien or other individuals, because these particular stories are what are called myths, but I use that in a different sense than most people use it, and you use it in a different sense as well, is a way to really tell some of the grand stories of Christianity, aren't they?
Well, that's right. And I think that I would strongly encourage your readers to think about how they would, in effect, think of, for example, the stories Jesus tells, we call the parables, or indeed, could they tell their own stories to help their atheist friends see how they discovered meaning and the difference it makes. I think stories are very, very powerful. There's very good biblical warrant for doing this. But one of the key points is to say, in my life, here is where I used to be, here is where I am now, here's how it happened, and here is the difference that it makes. Because it is so hard to argue with somebody who's discovered meaning, because it's so authentic. Telling your story really makes a difference to people.
And again, we've talked about that with you before in terms of almost a different view of apologetics. So I wanted to take a break, and when we come back, get into a little bit more of this. We've talked about wondering about ourselves. We'll continue looking at wondering about life, because what do we do when we start running into doubt or disbelief or other issues like that? And then maybe some of the imaginative roots of science, which I think you'll find interesting. And then really kind of wondering about what is our place in the cosmos. You know, a lot of us, the other night, we're out there looking through our telescopes at one of the comets and looking at some of these stars and some of these galaxies and things of that nature. And this is a very large universe. And what is our significance there? I think the Psalms address that issue, but we'll come back to that. And then before we're done, we'll talk about our future, because indeed we have the transhumanist and the humanist and others that have some ideas about the future, but, you know, the scriptures do as well. So this is a book just about ready to come out, and I wanted to give you advance warning so you can order it if you'd like to. And it is entitled Born to Wonder. Alister McGrath. It is published by our good friends at Tyndale. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore when it does arrive, but we're giving you a little bit of a week's notice before it comes out. And if you find yourself wanting to get some more information, we have a link to Alister McGrath's website. We have a link to this book so you can get it in paperback or Kindle. And most importantly, we've got some other information that would be helpful for you if you want to use this in terms of answering questions that others might have, or use it as a gospel presentation. All that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Alister McGrath as we talk about his book, Born to Wonder, exploring our deepest questions and why are we here and what does it matter, published by Tyndale. And one of the quotes that I enjoy, you start many of the chapters with a quote, but one of the ones that I got such a chuckle out of was from Thomas Nagel in chapter 6. He says, "It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that." And Dr. McGrath, you know, when I've done various debates with atheists, interacted with those, even had people call in, they oftentimes try to say, you know, really atheism would be the default setting. If it weren't for you religious people teaching religion, that wouldn't be the case. And yet, even if you go and read some of the biographies and autobiographies of some of the famous atheists, the Bertrand Russells and all sorts of other individuals, there's usually a time in which they said they believed in God and they got rid of the idea. So it's Thomas Nagel's kind of, if you will, rather transparent comment that it's not that I don't believe in God. I really don't want there to be a God because, after all, it might challenge my views. It might constrain my moral actions and those kinds of things. Maybe that explains a little bit more about atheism than we might normally have believed.
Well, I think that's right. I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that really atheism is a wish fulfillment. In other words, you don't want there to be a God because if there's no God, you can do what you like. And so, in effect, the wish comes first, and then you think up some reasons to say this is right afterwards. In other words, what comes first is this desire for there to be no God. Then you figure out the reasons afterwards. And the problem is, you're quite right, that so many atheists seem to think that theirs is the default position. It's not. The default position is we're not sure because, you know, these are big questions. And I think that atheism really needs to look very closely at its own motivations. Now, sure, I mean, with Christianity, you discover a life full of meaning, a gospel full of joy. It really offers some wonderful things. But the reason I gave up on atheism and went to Christianity is because I found it gave this much more truthful account of reality, and that's really important. But you are right, we need to challenge this almost like default position of our culture, which is that God is an invention designed to satisfy our needs. No. So is atheism, if anything is. And we really need to challenge that kind of inbuilt perception within our culture.
And again, you've talked about using this idea of talking about meaning. Last time we had you on, we talked about your book, Narrative Apologetics, which I believe is published by Baker. This book we're talking about here is Thomas Nelson. But again, a book I would commend to those of you that maybe need to think about doing apologetics in a little different way. But sometimes there are some questions that people have, and that brings us to one of your chapters on doubt and disbelief, some of the trauma. And I see that, you know, there are individuals sometimes that became atheists because of that issue of doubt. But just as some individuals give up on Christianity because they have something that challenges their faith or because they have doubt, I can see many others who work through that doubt, do the investigation, and become stronger Christians because they recognize that there are answers if they're willing to look for those in terms of what might actually have struck your life or a loved one that caused you to have doubt in the first place.
I think that's a very important point. And then, in fact, we can even go further than that because atheists have doubts as well. The whole thing about atheism is it cannot prove its core belief, which is that there is no God. When I was an atheist myself, I believed there was no God, but I knew I couldn't prove that. And that's a really important point because it's so often presented as if kind of atheism is factual, and so we poor Christians have to kind of way defend our beliefs. No, atheism is a belief. And Richard Dawkins had this really interesting debate with Rowan Williams in Oxford back in 2012, and Dawkins found himself unable to prove his own ideas, and in effect came to realize that in effect his was a belief, not a fact. I think it's a really important point. It's not atheist fact versus Christian belief. It's two different systems of belief. We've got to figure out which is the better. And for the reasons you've just given, it's Christianity. But listen very carefully. Anyone who's having doubts, you need to be aware all the really important beliefs in life lie beyond absolute proof. I can prove that 2 and 2 make 4, dead easy. If I were to say to you the meaning of life is God or the meaning of life is there is no God, I couldn't prove either of those are right. Atheists have to make a leap of faith themselves. And I'm telling you, I used to be an atheist. I made the leap of faith the other way, and I'm staying with Christianity. It makes so much more sense than atheism did.
Let's see if we can get into a couple of others. Wondering about life. You have a whole section here on wondering about nature, the imaginative roots of science. You know, I have 2 degrees in science, but I also recognize that sometimes you can get so involved in science that you miss what we'll call the wonder of science. And so you talk about this idea of wonder and natural theology and the appreciation of nature. Help us out with that.
Well, I used to be a scientist myself, and one of the things that really puzzled me was that science didn't really seem to know what to do with the beauty of nature. It's ordering. You could do something with that. Beauty, well, why is it there? And one of the things I talk about in this chapter is what we loosely call natural theology, this sense that if God made the world, then maybe it tells us something about God. Not as well as Scripture does, but nevertheless, there's something there that really brings home to us that God is not just and wise, but actually God has made something beautiful as well. And so I make the point in this chapter that really, for people who have appreciated the beauty of nature and are wondering, where does this take me? You can say to them, look, I can introduce you to the guy who made this. You appreciate the beauty of the creation. I can take you to the guy who made it. Come and meet the artist who painted the picture. And, if you talk to anybody who's met the artist, they'll say it was such a special event. But Christianity is saying, look at the beauty of nature. Now, come and meet the Creator. It's wonderful.
And I think it's just a piece that is missing sometimes. And, of course, you talk about some of that in your book, Native Narrative Apologetics. And I think there is just more and more of a recognition that we don't necessarily always have to present the gospel in a left hemisphere logical linear way. There is a place for the arts. There's a place for imagination. There's a place for wonder. And again, I guess I'm stealing some of the ideas from your book, but nothing else. That just is one other aspect of that chapter. But just before we move on to the next section, you have a place here about the wonder about our place in the cosmos, because this is a very huge universe. You have an opening quote from Pascal about the fact that we occupy just a little space in this eternal universe, or at least in eternity in terms of time, but also in the immensity of space. So space and time are greater than we are. And sometimes people then ask the question, well, what is man that God would be considering him?
Absolutely. When I was an atheist myself, I used to look at the night sky and say, hey, the light coming from those stars takes 1,000 years to get here. I'll be dead then. And it was really realizing that I was meaningless, insignificant. Now I'm a Christian, and I read Psalm 8. You just hinted at it. And it's all about, this is a vast universe, but there's a God. He loves me. I matter to him. And that means I'm not on my own. In other words, I can live meaningfully in this universe because there is a God, and that God loves me and knows me. And it just makes all the difference in the world. It means that you don't need to be frightened. You don't need to be lonely. You can walk tall because the God who made this is the God who loves you and redeemed you. It really makes a difference.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation as we talk about this book, Born to Wonder. Alister McGrath with us, and we've talked about wondering about ourselves, wondering about life, and then wondering about our future. And we'll start with what's wrong with us, why we need the idea of sin. But then what about some of these humanistic ideas and transhumanism and secular humanism and religious humanism and all the attempts to try to plan out our future from a human point of view, and then to come back and understand that from obviously the biblical perspective. So again, this is a book that I think you would certainly benefit from by reading, but it also is one that maybe you can hand to one of your friends that maybe is searching and thinking that there's really no need for us to consider Christianity. This will give you a chance to begin to wonder about meaning in life. And certainly during this pandemic, we've asked some fundamental questions and recognized that we don't control as much of the world as we thought that we did. So we'll come back and get into this in a little more detail and then give you a chance to order the book. It'll come out next week. It is published by our friends at Tyndale, and I think you're really going to appreciate the fact that we live in a world of space and time. Life is a gift. We weren't asked to be born, but here we are right now. What's the meaning to life? More importantly, where are we going, and why does it matter? We'll talk about all of that with Dr. Alister McGrath right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes as we talk with Dr. Alister McGrath about Born to Wonder. And we're going to look at the future, but first of all, we need to get into this idea of sin. And I love the way you illustrate that, because there was an individual who actually developed reagents for organic synthesis, and I won't go into all the work that he has done in organic chemistry, but nevertheless, you know, we today benefit from some of the medically important substances like steroids and vitamin K and all the rest, and you had such great respect for him until later you learned that also he worked with chemists to develop napalm, which, of course, is a petroleum gel that sticks to buildings, it sticks to human bodies. Once it's ignited, it cannot be extinguished. And whether you look at what you have in World War II or what was used in the Vietnam War, it was a reminder that science can, in a sense, as a tree, give you both good fruits and bad fruits. Science may be morally ambivalent, but then human beings can use some of these things that are developed, whether it is fire or nuclear power or whatever, in both good and bad ways. And so the issue is not the science. The issue are the scientists and the individuals that take that science and use it for good or evil, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Science is something that human beings do, and we are sinful, and that means that we can do some good things and we do some bad things. And I think we need to be absolutely clear that sin is a very biblical idea, and it's deadly realistic. It says this is the way we are, get used to it, face up to it, what can be done about how do we live in this way, and it means we need to avoid these very naive idealisms we find in our culture. Hey, we can do anything. All we've got to do is keep going. No. It's going to go wrong. We've got to be very, very realistic about who we are. Sure, we do some good things, and that's great, but we do some very bad things as well. And so Christianity gives us this wonderfully realistic view of human nature, and when I look at it and look at myself, I see myself reflected there. And you know how Chuck Colson got converted by reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Why? Because he read C.S. Lewis's account of the man of sin and said, that's me. I recognize myself. It's so powerful. And it's deadly realistic about who we are.
Yes. Well, in your chapter here on humanism, you give us the historical origins of humanism, and I can even say that you go back maybe 100-plus years, and there was just sort of this optimistic humanism. And then we had World War I, we had World War II, we had the concentration camps, we had all the other aspects that remind us that indeed secular humanism, or even a religious humanism, is based on a false view of human nature, and that's what we've just been talking about here right now, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, humanism basically is it's sort of idealism. I mean, I wish we were like that, but we're not. We've got to face up to the way things are and stop being kind of deluded about who we are. And that, to me, is so important. People very often say Christianity is pie in the sky. Well, what I'm going to say is it is looking at human beings, say, I can tell you exactly what's wrong with us and what can be done about it. And that's so important.
Well, and what you say near the end of this particular book is the need for realism, not optimism. And so talk about that, because you've had, and matter of fact, you even talk about Terry Eagleton's critique of new atheism. Of course, you've done that as well. And it does seem to me that as Christians, we need to reject what now is being presented as transhumanism, don't we?
Well, that's right. Transhumanism is saying, well, okay, we're going to die and we don't do things as well as we could. Let's just change human nature, and then we will live forever, and we'll do just the right things. But the problem is, when you look at it more closely, it involves reprogramming human beings so they think in different ways. And so you begin to wonder, who's just doing this reprogramming? It's all very, very threatening and very, very worrying. And I think that we really have this realization there's something wrong with us, and their answer is to say, let's reinvent humanity. The Christian answer is to say, no, God is able to take us and reshape us and remold us, and we can do something with that. But transhumanism is offering us the secularized gospel, which is all about, in effect, making us perfect, making us able to do anything, make us live forever. And, why? I mean, the whole point about life is that it's great, but you go on to something even better afterwards. It seems to me to be really living in a deluded world.
Let's, if we can, just talk about, first of all, how people can use this book, because I've suggested that this would be the kind of book I'd want to hand to somebody who's kind of seeking, maybe thinking about meaning of life, or maybe has never really approached the subject, but begins to be engaged in the book. But how would you suggest people might be able to use this book in an effective way?
Well, I think you're moving along the right lines there. Some of my books are saying, here's new atheism, it's wrong. This one is much more saying there's some really good questions we ask. Here they are. Here's an atheist answer. Well, it doesn't really work, does it? Here's a Christian answer. Well, this is actually rather more interesting, isn't it? It's a book which invites you in. If you're a non-Christian and you read this, you'll say, I recognize that. And you'll say, well, this answer is interesting. I need to think about this. So if you like, this book is invitational. It's not confrontational. It's trying to open questions up. It's giving you a very good sense of how Christianity answers some very good questions. It's a sort of book I hope you could feel you give to a thinking friend who might say, I'm wondering what Christianity is all about. Can you give me something to read? And this might be helpful to move them on to the next phase.
We also have a link to your website, and there it has a little more information about you, some of your projects, publications, engagements, as well as some of the books we've talked about, Narrative Apologetics, also Mere Discipleship. So talk about some of the resources that we have linked on the website here at Point of View to your website.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's very, very good to know that these resources are there. I just want to say that one of the things I try to bring out in all my books is how excited I am to have moved from atheism to be a Christian, and in effect, in my own personal Christian journey, to have discovered all these things that I find so interesting. And what I'm trying to really do is just share them with people and say, do you find this helpful? If so, please use it, because for me, Christianity is so wonderful. It makes sense of so much. And if we can help our friends to see that, that's really going to move things along.
We've been talking about the book Born to Wonder, and the previous one that we talked about, and you also can hear that interview, which is on the website, pointofview.net, on narrative apologetics. And Dr. Alister McGrath, it's always great to have you on the program, and I always look forward to the next opportunity.
It's been great being with you. Thank you so much.
Let's take a break, and if you find yourself saying, okay, I would like some more information on a couple of the guests that you've had here today, Dr. Michael Brown and Dr. Alister McGrath, and I've also done an earlier one with Dr. John Lott, which will probably play during this National Hour in the future, so you can be looking forward to that. Lots of great resources, all at the website, pointofview.net. And as we are talking about what is happening during this pandemic, of course, we've had the lockdown orders in California, so I wanted you to see this piece, which I think is a good summary of why Pastor John MacArthur and the staff there at Grace Community Church decided to hold services and the whole issue revolving around that. So that is one of the articles we've made available. We may come back tomorrow to talk about that in more detail. And from time to time, if I find what I think is a good article that does a critical evaluation of the Black Lives Matter movement, to be distinguished from the idea of Black Lives Matter, which do obviously matter, but the movement, the organization, the website. This particular piece by Carl Jackson I thought was very well written. 6 reasons Black Christians must denounce Black Lives Matter movement. And so that is available on the website there as well. My commentary today is on China. We have certainly heard quite a bit about communist China, and that is one of the reasons why I wanted to address that. And you can find that there as well. And I hope that you will take the time to find many of the other articles that we've posted. And if you'd like to hear any of these interviews once again, click on that button that says listen. You can download a podcast. Of course, you can watch it or even go to the YouTube channel and follow that as well. First of all, I want to thank Doug for his help engineering today. I want to thank Ivy for producing the program. Hope you enjoyed Point of View, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
(2020). It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.